How many of you have had the fascinating experience of visiting a natural history museum? So you probably remember the thrill of staring face-to-face to a roaring lion, or maybe the wonder of looking up at a towering dinosaur, or perhaps the intense gaze of majestic tiger just a centimeter away. We are all familiar with the static displays in natural history museums, such as stuffed animals and dioramas. But did you know that these museums are not only showcases, but also an active creators of scientific knowledge? Let's take an example from Maximo, the largest dinosaur ever discovered by scientists to date, showcased in the Field Museum in Chicago. On the first floor, you can see Maximo. But in the same building, just a couple of floors above or behind the walls, scientists from the museum are actively studying Maximo's fossil bones and other archaeological findings. These scientists, using cutting-edge techniques such as advanced imaging and comparative anatomy. This is a testament to an ongoing research right here in natural history museums. Now imagine that you are visiting a natural history museum and you are taking a 10-year-old child with you. You are entering the museum and you are looking at Maximo. Then you read on the signage that Maximo used to live on Earth 100 million years ago, and that he used to eat plants. Then the child might wonder, how do they know that? They weren't here 100 million years ago. Or perhaps the child might wonder, how did they extract these giant fossil bones? And once that they had these bones, how did they know how to put them together correctly? Now let's take another example. You are going to another museum right here in Tel Aviv, and you are looking at this display. And then the guide explains you that these animals used to live in Israel but became extinct. Then the child might wonder, who is doing this research? How do they know that? Did they follow them in the past? These questions give us the opportunity to speak about science, what is related to the concept of the nature of science. Nature of science is a concept that addresses the way science defines, the way science operates, the relationships between science and society, and the identity of scientists in terms of their personal and professional lives. The conversation about the nature of science in Natural History Museum holds immense importance. When visitors, especially young at the age, became aware of this concept, they gain understanding of how science operates, how scientific knowledge is conducted, nurturing scientific curiosity and understanding science as a human endeavor. These understandings develop critical thinking skills among the visitors, helps them to discern between credible information and misinformation, and to make more informed decisions. So in the next time, when the visitors face socio-scientific issues such as vaccination, healthy eating and farming, or maybe the usage of plastic and recycling, they will be better equipped to make these decisions more informed based on scientific knowledge. In the experience of natural history museums, there are two concepts. The first one is what we see, the exhibits and the displays. And the second one is what we learn about the nature of science. The first one, the exhibits, the displays, and the signages are well addressed. Even a quick Google research, for example, about the Natural History Museum in Berlin will give us the information about the presented exhibits and the highlights of related scientific knowledge. But in terms of what we learn about nature of science, it's a mystery to us. It's a lacune that needs to be filled. We're left wondering, is the conversation about science taking place in the museum? Are we being guided about different characteristics of science? Do we have the opportunity to see scientists? Or maybe do we have the opportunity to listen to their scientific journey? Understanding these concepts will help us to be more engaging and effective when we speak with the visitors about the nature of science. And this is where my research comes in. My research tries to understand how we integrate the different concepts related to the nature of science in natural history museums, answering the questions, which aspects of nature of science are integrated, and how are these aspects integrated into exhibit, tour plans, and guided tours. So how do I do my research? I conduct a qualitative study where I document exhibitions, guided tours, and interviews with guides, curators, and experts from museums in 6 countries worldwide. Analyzing this content gives me the information about how we communicate the nature of science in natural history museums. In our interviews, we tried to understand how museum guides integrate the nature of science into their guided tours. Or in other words, how do the museums speak with the visitors about science? Our research indicated 3 practices that recently were published in the scientific literature: reference to scientific research, reference to research conducted in the museum, and reference to research related to the exhibits. Each of these practices followed by categories that show us the differences in the approaches of the museum guides. Let's take an example from one of the guides. Imagine that you are entering a natural history museum and you face the ancient skeleton of Lucy. And then the guide provides the following explanation. There is always the subject of Homo erectus. Basically, the first finding where evidence was found of a humanid that walked upright. And years after that, the skeleton known through the world as Lucy was discovered, which is much more ancient species and can walk upright. So suddenly, the entire scientific world looked at this and realized that earliest theories had made a mistake, and we need to change all the books. That is the part of the beauty of science, because there is this great humility here to say, we made a mistake. But look how wonderful. Now we know something new and much bigger, and who knows what else we will find. It's always possible to disprove what was found by those who came before us. There is always room for doubt. It's never that's it ends here. Here we can see that this museum guide engages the visitors in inspiring conversation about the scientific theories, emphasizing the roles of critique, creativity, and doubt in the realm of scientific inquiry. Let's take a look to another example. Imagine you are entering a natural history museum and you face an exhibit about the Neanderthals. As a part of the exhibit, you watch the following video. Here, the scientists explain how do we know what we know about Neanderthals. She mentions DNA and other archaeological findings, such as stone tools and the fossils themselves, that give us answers to the questions about Neanderthals. This way, the scientists engages visitors in inspiring conversation about the different nature of science aspects. For example, the practices, the methods, and the evidence acceptable in science. What is unique about those examples is that they explicitly mention conversation about science. They explicitly address different aspects of nature of science, highlighting scientific concepts and drawing visitors' attention to them. Our findings indicated that the conversation about the nature of science in natural history museums usually takes an implicit approach, which is unplanned and between the lines. However, educational research suggests that the more explicit approach is a much more effective approach when we want to communicate the nature of science. So we actually can see the gap between the 2 approaches in natural history museums. Understanding this gap will give us the opportunity to be more effective and engaging when we communicate about the nature of science. So in the meantime, the next time you visit a natural history museum and you take a 10-year-old child with you, you may meet Maximo or one of his contemporaries. I invite you to not only wonder about their magnificence and uniqueness, but also to grasp the opportunity to speak about how do we know all this and who is standing behind these fascinating discoveries. Thank you very much.